Hi there, I'm Chris Banks, the designer of the Banks Bar. Now, the Banks Bar itself is an inspiration from Jim over at Vino Farm, who did amazing work researching what this sort of combined bar can do for bees and the beekeeper. I'd like to cover a couple things. One, the design features that I've upgraded and implemented into the Banks bar, and how to use it, how to assemble it, the appropriate equipment, and the actual implementation, similar to how Jim over at Vino Farm did. All right. The next thing I'd like to cover is the features of the Banks sidebar. So the Banks sidebar itself is designed after the idea and testing that Jim did over at Vino Farm. Again, you can find that link down below. The concept that Jim demonstrated is that you could take a extended sidebar and incorporate foundation from both a deep and a medium hive body, so that way the bees could build a continuous brood pattern. I've seen other people implement double deep versions of these, and I really feel like that might be a little bit excessive, and I think I'm in agreement with Jim there. But there's a couple things that I wanted to see through on this. Jim's idea of having a completely insulated, non-ventilated hive, it proved to have a lot of credence to it. It's a really good idea, but the bees still need to move air around inside that hive body. The entrance they can completely control, and in nature you see it where the main entrance is at the base of a tree, and they love to move up through that tree. But they still can control the airflow. Some of the other sidebars that you'd see in these, they kind of close it off, or because they're so long, they become ajar and clunky, where you might get cross comb or not desired structure within the hive, which is counterintuitive to the inspection for when you pull it out and you have comb building off in certain directions, just because of the way that the sidebars bound up at the bottom. So to go back to the features itself, I built in ventilation holes at the top and the bottom, but these are dual purpose because these are built with specific bee space in mind. This allows the queen to be able to transit behind the sidebar, so that way she can get to the other side and get around on the hives. A lot of people, they like to cut off corners in the top, and that's just wasted space. That's resource space. So while we're condensing down from some people doing double deeps, we're regaining some of that space back for useful, particularly in the corners, honey for overwintering. Resources like pollen can actually be put in between both the honey and the brood. You're just expanding resources in a constrained space that you're trying to get for them to keep heated without giving them too much space to heat. It's that sort of trying to find that sweet spot. So the ventilation holes on the top and the bottom are there, in particular for both transit and ventilation. The other part is a variation in design from what Jim has demonstrated in the carpentry side. Is we've actually got a space for them to use. There's a small portion on the bottom here, a blade almost, if you would say, that encourages the bees to build comb out. The intent here is to actually have the bees use that space as well. They can, as Jim said, either use it to transit or to build comb there, but at least they have the option. Thirdly is we were talking about binding of the frames down at the bottom, and what I've done here down at the bottom is to actually enable a protrusion that maintains bee space. What ends up by happening is with some of the other frames is they do not have that sort of bee space consistent because that bulge is not there. So you could end up by denying both airflow and transit of bees between the bee frames. What I've done is implement, from what I've seen other frames do, is implement something that maintains that specific bee space. This will allow bees to continually transit through and will maintain consistency of comb up and down. So that way you don't have things like burr comb, cross comb, because the frames were not aligned properly. Some concerns people had were, how do you bond wood to plastic? So this is PLA, which is 3D printed, and believe it or not, we'll cover that a little bit later, but we've got structural design in there with that little peg right there, right? And that is enough to fill in that bottom portion right there. And when you drill into the holes, which are already pre-designed on there, hopefully you can see that, those holes are already set to receive a screw that is the number 6 1 1/4 drywall screw. One of the most common screws in a household, and cheap, accessible, no matter where you are, you'll be able to find it. These screws are more than enough to retain and keep both the top and the bottom bar in place for each of your inspections. That covers about 90% of it. There are design features that I am coming out with for new bars. I hope that you come back and take a look at it on what there is to offer from the Banks bar. And a special thanks to Jim for all the research and effort that he put in. Honestly, he was about 90% of the reason I even got into beekeeping anyways. So thank you and have a great day.